As we have learned throughout this program, Section 24.2 will only exclude evidence that was obtained in a manner that infringed upon a charter right. In order for evidence to be considered obtained in a manner, it must share a causal or temporal connection to the charter violation. A connection that is too remote will fail this stage of the evidence exclusion inquiry under Section 24.2. Recalling the statements made by Chief Justice Dixon and Strachan, there will be instances where the connection between the obstruction of a charter right and the obtention of evidence may be too remote for the evidence to be deemed obtained in a manner that infringed upon a charter right. A few years after Strachan, the Supreme Court would revisit the connection between charter violations and the manner evidence is obtained, specifically the issue of remoteness. As we have learned throughout this program, Section 24.2 will only exclude evidence that was obtained in a manner that infringed upon a charter right. In order for evidence to be considered obtained in a manner, it must share a causal or temporal connection to the charter violation. A connection that is too remote will fail this stage of the evidence exclusion inquiry under Section 24.2. Recalling the statements made by Chief Justice Dixon and Strachan, there will be instances where the connection between the obstruction of a charter right and the obtention of evidence may be too remote for the evidence to be deemed obtained in a manner that infringed upon a charter right. A few years after Strachan, the Supreme Court would revisit the connection between charter violations and the manner evidence is obtained, specifically the issue of remoteness. In the matter of Regina v. Goldhart, the accused was convicted of possessing and cultivating cannabis after the police had searched a converted schoolhouse building in which 3 individuals were occupying, including Goldhart. Initially, the police had received tips that the accused was growing cannabis inside the building and decided to visit in order to conduct surveillance and to gather evidence against the accused. Initial efforts to make contact with the building's occupants produced negative results, so the police hatched a plan impersonating agents of the previous owners of the building in order to make contact with the occupants of the building to gather evidence of any type of cannabis cultivation. The police then proceeded to go around the back of the building, and that while they were at the back entrance, they detected the smell of cannabis through the building's vents. The police then used this information and this evidence to get a search warrant to conduct a search where they found over 3,000 cannabis plants inside the basement of the building. From the offset of this case, there were concerns regarding the reasonableness of the search, specifically the police's initial surveillance of the building. The question to be determined was whether or not the police's surveillance of the building's perimeter, which led police to the evidence that helped them obtain a search warrant against Goldhart and his co-defendants, ultimately amounted to an unreasonable search and a breach of Section 8 of the Charter. One of the 3 men located inside the building, a man named Mr. Mayer, was a born-again Christian at the time criminal proceedings began in this matter, and despite the advice of his lawyer, decided to plead guilty to cultivating cannabis at his own preliminary hearing. Now, at Goldhart's initial trial, the trial judge had decided to exclude the evidence linked to Goldhart and the cannabis plants, 3,000 of them, on the grounds that the evidence was found during a charter violation. Now, the Crown, feeling the pressure of having this evidence excluded, needed to call some type of other evidence against Goldhart in order to get a conviction. So the Crown decided to call Mr. Mayer to the trial to speak against Mr. Goldhart, which ultimately led to a conviction against Mr. Goldhart for the charges mentioned earlier. Now, this conviction was overturned at the Court of Appeal on the grounds that Mr. Mayer's evidence had been obtained during a charter violation, and its admission at trial would bring the administration of justice into disrepute. The Crown then appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. Justice Sapinka of the Supreme Court spoke about remoteness in regards to the connection between charter violations and the manner in which evidence is obtained. Although Therens and Strachan warned against over-reliance on causation and advocated an examination of the entire relationship between the charter breach and the impugned evidence, causation was not entirely discarded. Accordingly, while a temporal link will often suffice, it is not always determinative. It will not be determinative if the connection between the securing of the evidence and the breach is remote. I take remote to mean that the connection is tenuous. The concept of remoteness relates not only to the temporal connection, but to the causal connection as well. It follows that the mere presence of a temporal link is not necessarily sufficient. In obedience to the instruction that the whole of the relationship between the breach and the evidence be examined, it is appropriate for the court to consider the strength of the causal relationship. If both the temporal connection and the causal connection are tenuous, the court may very well conclude that the evidence was not obtained in a manner that infringes a right or freedom under the Charter. On the other hand, the temporal connection may be so strong that the Charter breach is an integral part of a single transaction. In that case, a causal connection that is weak or even absent will be of no importance. Once the principles of law are defined, the strength of the connection between the evidence obtained and the Charter breach is a question of fact. Accordingly, the applicability of Section 24(2) will be decided on a case-by-case basis as suggested by Chief Justice Dixon in Strachan. Here, Justice Sapinka emphasizes the need for a strong and sufficient causal or temporal relationship to exist between the Charter violation and the manner in which evidence was obtained in order for evidence to be excluded. Later, while speaking for the majority of the Supreme Court, he would apply this approach to the matter of Goldhart specifically. In order to find a temporal link, the pertinent event is the decision of Mayer to cooperate with the Crown and testify, and not his arrest. Indeed, the existence of a temporal link between the illegal search and the arrest of Mayer is of virtually no consequence. Moreover, any temporal link between the illegal search and the testimony is greatly weakened by intervening events of Mayer's voluntary decision to cooperate with the police, to plead guilty, and to testify. The application of the causal connection factor is to the same effect. The connection between the illegal search and the decision by Mayer to give evidence is extremely tenuous. Having regard, therefore, to the entire chain of events, I am of the opinion that the nexus between the impugned evidence and the Charter breach is remote. Essentially, the Supreme Court agreed that when looking at the relationship between the Charter violation and the manner in which evidence was obtained, intervening events will cause the relationship to be deemed too tenuous or too remote to be said to have been obtained in a manner that infringed upon a Charter right. In the case of Goldhart, the witness's testimony was an expression of his own free will and not a result of the police's initial search which led to his arrest. In contrast, recently in Ontario, the meaning of obtained in a manner has been broadened, allowing for the exclusion of evidence surrounding Charter violations that take place against an accused even after the police have discovered cannabis. Such was the case in Regina v. Pino, where the police had violated the accused's Section 10 rights to counsel after discovering 50 cannabis plants in the trunk of her vehicle. After the seizure, the police had left Pino in police lockup for more than 5 hours without having access to her counsel. Justice Laskin at the Court of Appeal stated that when a court is considering the manner of which evidence was obtained, the court should consider the entire chain of events between the accused and the police, as well as the connection between the evidence and the breach. The connection may be causal, temporal, or contextual. In analyzing the case at hand, Justice Laskin states, "The connection between the evidence and the breaches is both temporal and contextual and is neither too tenuous nor too remote. The connection is temporal because the three breaches are relatively close in time and are part of a continuum straddling Ms. Pino's arrest. The connection is also contextual, a word often used by lawyers and judges to mean pertaining to the surroundings or situation in which something happens. In this case, the something that happened is Ms. Pino's arrest, and the two Section 10b breaches and the Section 8 breach surrounded her arrest or arose out of it." After its analysis, the Ontario Court of Appeal determined that the fact that the breaches occurred after the evidence was obtained did not diminish their seriousness, and ultimately decided that to allow evidence of the cannabis plants at trial would bring the administration of justice into disrepute. Here in Pino, although the evidence was obtained well before any Charter breaches, the temporal connection was sufficient enough to warrant the evidence being excluded.